Welcome to Season 7 of my podcast, Between Us, Stories of Unconscious Bias. This season, I speak to people in Mexico, America, Ireland, Sri Lanka, India, and the UK. I have stories that I'm sure will resonate with anyone, anywhere in the world. For example, how to be more confident. Or how are we seen differently in the country of our birth, only because we don't look like everyone else? I also hear stories that are chilling, and I'm moved at how the speaker found the inner resilience to overcome their challenges. I hear stories of music, religion, and so much more. I hope you take away as much as I have when hearing these stories. Thank you so much for listening. When a catastrophic event happens in our lives, many of us feel very sorry for ourselves. We think we are the victim. We feel we don't deserve what has happened to us. We have so many emotions going through our head: fear, anger, possibly even guilt. How can we find the inner reserve within us to overcome these emotions and become positive, successful, productive people? How do we challenge these instinctive negative unconscious biases that are holding us back? This is Between Us, Stories of Unconscious Bias. I am Smitha Tharoor. I'd like to introduce Laura Kavanagh. Laura is the co-host at Talk of the Town podcast that's already garnering a lot of interest. She's there on Instagram, so please do search for her. Laura is also a competitive powerlifter, mother of 4 and grandmother of 2. Laura lives in Dublin in Ireland. Laura has many, many stories to share, all of which are different but similar, that might resonate with people around the world. So I know that I'm looking forward to hearing Laura sharing her stories with me. Thank you, Laura, for joining me today to share your stories of unconscious bias.
You're very welcome, Smita. Thank you so much for having me.
So unconscious bias, Laura, before you even start sharing stories, any thoughts on what that actually means to you, unconscious bias?
I do. And now I have been a barber for 20 years, so I fully understand unconscious bias, as in a certain person might walk into the barber shop and immediately I will unconsciously presume what way their life is, how they are, and only when I actually get to start the haircut and chat away, 9 times out of 10, I am 100% wrong in what my bias was when I saw them come through the door. And I find it quite incredible with a lot of them. I mean, one lad in particular, I remember years ago saying to the guy that I worked with, which is actually my partner, and I said to him, wow, isn't he a really, really nice, genuine guy? And he was like, Laura, he stabbed somebody on Wednesday. I was like, oh my God. When he came in, he presented himself so clean, so friendly, so, really, really had a lot of respect for us coming in, chatted away, and to the point that I had to comment when he left and said, wow, he's a really nice guy, isn't he? But I would never, ever, ever have thought, oh, here's this fella coming in here. He looks like he'd hurt you, or he looks
Or you
dangerous.
stabbed somebody, yeah. There are
Never.
a couple of things here. The
I
fact that when you said the word barber,
yeah.
I thought to myself, Laura's a woman. My unconscious bias means she should be a hairdresser. You cut men's hair, not women's hair. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. That is another.
Because if you hear a woman's voice and we're talking about cutting of hair, in my instinctive unconscious mind, it is obviously women's hair and you're a hairdresser. But you chose the word barber, and I thought, hang on a minute. So she doesn't cut women's hair, she cuts men's hair. And
Yeah.
you're so right, though, isn't it? Because the whole idea of getting stories and looking at a stranger, and you see strangers every day, many times a day, walking into your barber shop, and you jump to conclusions just looking at them. Then you cut the hair, you talk to them, you jump to further conclusions, and you could be completely wrong. It's a great way to start this interview with you, Laura. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. And a completely opposite end of the scale as well. We actually had a guy come in one day. I presumed he was from the area for a start. And when he came in, he was just in a tracksuit and trainers and, he'd a backpack on his back. And I was saying, oh, he must be just a young lad, probably going to football or whatever. It turned out he was a young lad and he was on his way to the gym, but he was actually a brain surgeon in Beaumont Hospital in Dublin. And again, it took 10 minutes into the haircut before I actually, got chatting to him. And then he told me this, and I was like, I never, ever would have known that, because you expect to see, I mean, if I thought, oh, here's a doctor coming in, I would expect to see a suit and a briefcase. You kind of forget, you do forget that people aren't always in
Wear
their
the suit and a briefcase.
in their
Exactly.
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 You know,
Yeah.
I'm a power lifter, but I don't walk around with a barbell on my shoulders.
I
Going,
was about to say that exactly.
uh,
Because, I mean, people will see your photograph when I post it on Instagram and so on, and they will look at you and they'll say, oh, this lady is a powerlifter. How about that?
yeah.
So, yeah. But to come back to this idea of unconscious bias, Laura, I wonder whether you could share a story with us,
Um,
something about your personal experience.
a personal experience of the bias towards me goes along all sides as well. Being a barber and a power lifter, but even before the powerlifting came into play, I have many tattoos. I've met you, Smita, so you've seen a lot of my tattoos. I all of a sudden, when I started my Instagram page, which by the way saved me in many, many ways from depression and anxiety and things. But when I did start the Instagram page, I think because I was a barber and because of the many tattoos that I have, one unconscious bias that I came across, and now I say one, but it was many, many, many people got into their heads that because I was a barber and because I had tattoos, that I was gay. And it amazed me because every morning I would wake up and there would be women sending pictures of their boobs into my messages. And I was completely amazed by this. I was like, why are they sending me this? And it was only afterwards I was saying it to somebody else and they said, maybe they think that you're gay. Like, no, my cousin is gay. I have a lot of friends who are gay, friends, family, and of course, customers. And I'm used to that. Do you know what I mean? But it was something that I hadn't thought of in going getting the tattoos, and I hadn't thought of in all of my 20 years of barbering. But as soon as I went to social media, like that, you're opening yourself up to the world. And I kind of speak from the heart when I talk on my Instagram. The page is This Mammy, and I set it up to kind of build myself up as a mother and to, I suppose, during the lockdown, because I wasn't able to be in the barber shop, all the barber shops were closed. I needed an outlet. I needed to keep talking to people. And that was how the page came about. But that is my kind of only unconscious bias. I did get it from it at the beginning. Now it's gotten a little bit heavier to the point that now that I'm powerlifting, I get a lot of hatred. I do get DMs from people saying, you know, you shouldn't be posting your pictures on Instagram. It's not fair on other people. And I've had other people say, do you think you're better than everybody else? And for a long time, it actually did stop me posting. I don't know if you've had the same things, Smita, but I find that alongside unconscious bias, we all have an unconscious bias where we're walking down the road and I could see somebody and I will just kind of presume their life or wonder, I wonder what they do or how many kids they have or whatever. I would just be inquisitive like that because it's in my nature, I think, as a barber. But I do find that with social media, with this mammy page and even Facebook, I do find that you do open yourself up to scrutiny. And although we all have an unconscious bias, some people take it to the next level and can actually hurt you with that.
You're
They
so right. You are
don't,
so right, Laura, because
yeah, it can be.
unfortunately, because of their own unconscious biases and how they see themselves, it's possible that people then get vindictive. And social media is sadly also the platform, on one level, for support and growth and development and learning, and on the other hand, for hatred and anger and jealousy, which is very sad. But let's come back to you, Laura. So, you shared a story around where you were at the barber and the fact that you've got tattoos and so on. But let's go back to when you were younger. I mean, can you share a story from earlier years that might have defined you in different ways?
Well, I grew up with an alcoholic mom, and you're talking about the 80s. So obviously, all of the neighbors could see, how our family life was. So, as you can imagine, my friends, their parents would kind of know that, well, everything's not 100% in that house. So, they were absolutely fantastic, I have to say, where my friends, their parents would say, "Oh, right, everybody come on in. Laura, I have dinner for you as well." Because they just knew. And it was lovely because there was no bias in that. They literally knew what was going on because my mom was a heavy drinker, like a bottle of vodka or more a day. And that was from when I was very, very, very young. So obviously, living with a drinker, and my mom was also a single mother, there wasn't a lot of money in our house. So when the shopping would be done, say, there was actually a lock on our fridge because everything that was bought for the shopping for the week had to last a week, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
When obviously going to school, we wouldn't have been in the best of clothes. Our uniform had to last a few years, things like that. So growing up, I did feel a lot of bias towards me with, peers because I was very skinny. So I remember I was probably in fourth class. So we'd say maybe I was 10. And I remember these kids in the playground talking and saying, "She's anorexic, that girl." But I wasn't anorexic. I was just very hungry,
Yes.
to be honest. But I do have to say, because of my friends' parents, they did make my life a lot easier than say it could have been. Also, obviously, not with my friends, but people that I didn't necessarily know that lived in the area, they would think that I had no pride in myself or whatever because of what the clothes that I wore, but wouldn't have realized, oh well, she has a hard time at home, and I was literally in kind of rags, we will say. Yeah, that was hard. That was really hard because at the time, a lot of people would have kind of said things to me like, "Oh, would you not wear this or would you not wear that?" And, different outfits that they'd have gotten, whatever was kind of out at the time, your Levi's and things like that back in the 80s and 90s. And I was always make an excuse and say, "Oh, no, I don't really like them." But it was because I didn't want kind of the truth being out about my mother and the home life and everything. And like it wasn't a home that you could bring people into again because of bias. Because I would think to myself, okay, well, if I bring even my best friend in who pretty much knows how I'm living, they could go and tell other people and the story could expand. And I already felt the pressure at 10 years old that I was less than everybody else. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense, Laura. And I'm just thinking of you and I'm thinking of little Laura, age 10. And you said we, so you have a sibling. Is that
I
correct?
I have an older brother who is now living in America, but I also had a younger brother. Jamie was born when I was 9. So
All right.
when Jamie was 2 years old, I pretty much had to do everything. My mom was she just wasn't able. Now my mom has since passed. Unfortunately, we didn't talk for a long, 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 long time, and we didn't talk even when she was dying because I didn't feel that I could forgive her, and I'll explain now. My mom, she was a big drinker. She obviously had her own mental health problems. But when Jamie was 2, that's my little brother, I wanted all the time. My mom had a TV in her room. And if you remember back in the 80s and early 90s, people didn't have TVs in their bedroom. They rarely had them in their house. So what I did was I was like, I want to sleep in my mom's room. So I always cried and I said, oh, can I sleep in your room, please? Because I shared a room with my baby brother. So this particular night I did. I said, please, can I sleep in your room? And I went and I stayed in her room, and I woke up during the night's Mita and I was being sexually abused by my mother. That absolutely horrified me. I was 11 years old, so I didn't actually get the gravity of the situation at the time, but I just knew that this is not right. This is horrible. I need to remove myself from the situation straight away. So I just got up and I ran out of the room. I went into my little brother's room, who I shared a room with, and he was like 2 years old. So I held him, I put his head in my two hands, and I looked at him and I said, Jamie, I will never let this happen to you ever. And he was my coping mechanism. So for all of my teenage years, I never mentioned it again to my mother. I pretended that I didn't remember, if that makes sense, because I didn't want to relive it. I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted it just to have never happened because, as I said, my mom, she was a single mother. Because she was a drinker, her family didn't come to visit. She was really all we had. So I went from having one really important person in my life, and although she was a drinker, she was, she was still my mom. But I went from going to bed that night to waking up the next morning with absolutely nobody that I could count on, you know, absolutely nobody. And at 11 years old as well, I thought, now I did see my dad weekly and I need to find that out. But at that age, I thought, for a start, how do I bring up that conversation? How would I tell him? Will he believe me? Will he ring my mom and give out to her and she will say it's a lie? And then I'd be in trouble. So I chose to say nothing. And I thought, for the rest of my teenage years, I am going to focus on this 2 year old boy, which I did. So fast forward then, I brought Jamie everywhere with me and we had the most incredible bond. But when I was 18, I fell pregnant on my first daughter, Nikita. She's now 21. She's amazing. And she literally saved my life on many occasions. She will never, ever, ever know how many times she saved my life just by being here. When I got pregnant, I was told to move out or have an abortion, and that I was not willing to do. So I moved out and I had Nikita. And when Nikita was born, I had been out of the house 6 months at that stage, just between 6 months and a year. I couldn't be sure exactly. But Jamie, there was an incident at my mother's house where Jamie got locked out of the house. She had fallen asleep drunk and he was trying to get in. So a neighbour across the road called me and I went up to the house and I couldn't get in either. We had to break the door down and she was comatose asleep on the sofa, but I thought that she had passed. So I was shaking her. I was like, Ma'am, wake up, wake up. I eventually woke her up, and her first reaction was to scream at Jamie, jump off the chair, and run at him and say, why did you ring her? I was just asleep. But it was like 11 p.m. around that time, and Jamie was only 11 years old. So instantly, the police came and he was taken into care. Now, it was a bank holiday weekend, I'll never forget it. So my own dad took Jamie because I had nowhere to bring him. Because I'd been kicked out for being pregnant, I was staying at Nikita's dad's parents' house. So there was nowhere for Jamie there either. So my own dad, who's not Jamie's dad, he took him in for the weekend until we could speak to social workers on the Monday. And that was okay. So that we did. They told me then that because I had a newborn baby and I was only 19, that I couldn't take Jamie myself. So unfortunately, Jamie was put into care and he went to stay, thank God, with an absolutely amazing family about 10 minutes from where I lived. But because Jamie was so upset about this and me and him were so close, he didn't want to go there. So they said, look, we're going to stop access, as in I wasn't allowed to see Jamie for about a month because they wanted Jamie to bond with this couple, understandably, to make him more comfortable. So that's what they did. And after a few months, I found a place, I got to court, and I tried to get him. And my dad, in fairness, he came with me and he said, look, I'm not Jamie's dad, but I am Laura's dad, and I will be there to make sure that everything's okay and all the rest of it. So thanks to him, I did get Jamie. Jamie was an absolute character. He was my best friend, my brother, and my son rolled into one. And as I said, got me through my teenage years.
And the uncle to your little baby.
And the uncle to my little baby. So when Jamie came to live with me, Nikita was 6 months old. So they were reared as brother and sister. And when Jamie was 17, he had just started sixth year in school, his final year. So it would be his leaving cert. Is it GCSEs in England? But he had just started his leaving cert or year. And I had always said to him, Jamie, stay in school, stay in school. For everybody that said, we can't do this is how you show them, oh, yes, we can. So he did, and he put everything into school. And by the October of his final year, Jamie got swollen glands. So I brought him to the doctor. The doctor said, okay, I think he has glandular fever, so you better bring him to the hospital. Brought him to the hospital, and they treated him in there for 2 weeks for glandular fever, which obviously had no effect. And then they told me that they were going to do a biopsy on him. So what had happened was he had a tumour behind his nose that came down both sides of his face, and it's called a nasopharyngeal carcinoma. Jamie then, they told him that it was very treatable. So they put him through 12 weeks of radiotherapy and 6 months of chemo. Jamie was an absolute trooper. So on his 18th birthday, they called us in and he had finished all his treatment, and they called us in and they said, Jamie, your scans are clear, your cancer is gone, and happy birthday. It was his 18th birthday. So I had organised a night out for him and his friends, and one of his friends, that guy's older brother, was a very good friend of mine. So he said to me, look, I'm going to go out with them. I said, you know what? He's just got the all clear. I want him to really let his hair down and enjoy himself, because I thought he might hold back if his big sister is there, you know. So I didn't go. And I got that guy, Jim, in fairness to him, he went and he looked after them all. And Jamie had the best 18th birthday. And a week later, the hospital called me and they said, look, we need you to come back in, but come back on your own. So I went back and they said to me, look, we are so sorry. We were scanning Jamie from the neck up. And for their own final signing off for Jamie, we'll say, they gave him a full body scan. And in the full body scan, they realised that the radiotherapy had worked, where it had broken all the little pieces. And the chemotherapy is then supposed to melt, for the want of a different word, those little pieces. The chemotherapy, they said they may have pumped water through him. The chemo did nothing. So unfortunately, all Jamie's cancer attached itself onto every organ that he had, and he was given 6 months to live. I said to them, you gave Jamie the all clear last week on his birthday. Please, please don't tell him. And they said, look, he's 18, so we're obliged to tell him. And I said, but if he doesn't ask, does that stand? And they said, no, if he doesn't ask, we don't have to say anything at this point. So he didn't ask. And Jamie was full sure that he was going to recover. So we carried on like that. And that went on then for another year, until we finally had to move him to a hospice. Even in the hospice, he was still sure that he was getting home because he was young. He had been told that he would recover. And because he was so young, he had plans. He had all sorts of plans for the future. And one day, he had been in the hospice for 9 weeks. And one day in there, I stayed every single night with him. And I had gone home this particular morning for a shower. And he rang me about half an hour after I got home, and he said to me, Laurie, are you coming back up? And I said, of course I am. He said, I just have something to tell you. So when I got back up there, I went into him and I said, what's going on? Are you all right? And he said, look, I need to tell you something. He said, I'm dying. And I said, Jamie, who told you that? And I got really annoyed. And, you know, I had said to them, please don't tell him. And he said, no, Laura, please don't do this. He said, the nurse didn't want to tell me anything. So I called the doctor and he said, well, how do you think you're doing, Jamie? And his exact words were to her, please don't say that to me. It's taken me all these weeks to get the courage to ask you.
Hmm.
But he actually felt that he needed to break the news to me. Jamie saved me. Now, what came next wasn't pretty. I'll get to that now. But
I'm going to pause there for a minute, Laura, because I want the listeners. I have been sitting here listening to you, and there's a what came next. I don't even know what to make of the stories that you have already said.
yeah,
You've talked about your childhood of an alcoholic mother.
yeah,
You've talked about sexual abuse by the only human being who you thought was there for you, your mother.
yes,
And you talk then of your darling brother who was taken by social care, but you managed to bring him back into your home. And you talked about you being a single parent of a little child.
yeah,
And then you've just shared a story of your brother
yeah,
being diagnosed with cancer and dying. And I just wanted to pause for
yeah,
all of us to take breath
yeah,
just for a minute
yeah, absolutely.
to appreciate you've given all of us listeners the privilege of hearing your story, Laura.
Yeah,
And there's more to come, is what you're saying.
there's
But
more.
I want us to just stop and think for a minute.
Hmm.
This is Laura, who I just spoke to just a few minutes ago when we opened this interview, when we were laughing about her being a barber.
Yeah,
And talk about unconscious bias. You walk into that barber shop, you happen to be in Dublin, and you see this young woman, yes, with tattoos, cutting your hair and chatting with you. And will any of us have any idea what kind of life you've had when you walk into that shop? Not me, because I'm a woman, but to my sons or my husband to come and get their hair cut.
yes,
And that alone is making me just stop and just absorb what you've said. And I appreciate this because there are many questions that are coming to my head, but I thought, let me pause. And I mean, I'll hand it back over to you now, Laura. You were saying that your brother saved you in what way?
he saved me when he told me that he was going to die. Me and Jamie were very close, and he knew exactly my thought process. We were best friends because I needed to counsel him through what was going on through his teenage years because he felt a lot of rejection. But the way he saved me was when he explained to me that he was going to die, and God love him, he said to me, I have a tattoo of him on my arm, just his name. And he said to me, I bet you're glad you got that tattoo now. But he made light of it because he saw how upset I was. And he said to me, Laura, I know what you're like, and I know that you're going to be crying all the time. And he cried and he said, please don't be upset when I die. It's just bad luck. It's not anybody's fault. And he said, if I was here forever, I would get married. He said, there's lots of things that I would do, and there's a lots of things that you need to do. So he said, I'm going to ask you two things. He said, number one is bury me close to where you live so you can come and see me all the time. And number two is to not be sad, but live for the two of us. And I'm actually going to write a book called Live for the Two of Us because that in itself saved my life. The very same as Nikita has. He will never know what those words meant to me because I think when somebody loses somebody, when you're grieving, you find it very hard, the first laugh after it's happened or the first day out where you catch yourself enjoying yourself. There's that really sick element of grief and sadness and guilt that you're laughing and you're having fun, although that person's not there anymore. Where what Jamie said to me took all of that away. Every time I did catch myself laughing or catch myself starting to do something new, or, even being saying, okay, I'd love to go to a disco tonight, or I'd love to go to the cinema, and, anything that I wanted to do for me, I didn't have to feel guilty about it. I was able to say, no, Jamie told me to live for the two of us. So I am just fulfilling his wish. And that made
He
me
gave you permission, didn't
so
he?
much. Yeah, it gave me so much. It allowed me to move on without the guilt. Do you know what I mean?
If I think about your growing up years
Yes.
and then your with your brother and then losing your brother.
Yes.
There are a few words that come up to my mind.
Yeah.
One is abandonment.
Oh, yeah.
The other is trust or lack of trust, where your trust has been abused.
Yes. I find it very hard to trust people now, Smeeta, because of that.
And that's your unconscious bias, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
that's part of your DNA, because of the huge abuse of your personal trust and your personal space.
Yeah.
How do you then learn to trust other people?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, when I started this Mammy page, in one way it was to kind of speak to adult people, because I do live interviews and I love to talk to people all the time. I think that comes from barbering. But I also know that, as you said, I was introduced as a barber and a co-host of a podcast. But not in a million years, if you met me, would you know any of that has happened. But I find a lot of them then with the This Mammy page, they presumed or unconscious bias would show them that, oh, well, she's posting things about her life on her page and she thinks she's great and she's putting up pictures of
But
herself.
on the contrary, if I think about you, because I said about abandonment, I said
Yeah,
about your complete trust going. Then,
yeah,
of course, unfortunately, the one person that you trusted implicitly, your little brother,
yeah,
dies.
yeah,
So once again, I mean, I know you have a little child, but you can't lean on that child for your emotional support because the child is very little. So once again, you are alone.
yeah,
Once again, you are trying to find something within you to get up in the morning and
yeah,
to live your life. At one level, Jamie's last words to you, saying you've got to do it for the both of us, gave you the strength to carry on. But
yeah,
then there's something else within you, Laura, that is your unconscious bias, your life experiences. On one hand, you say to me that because of your life experiences, you don't trust easily. It's hard for you to trust.
yeah.
But also because of your life experiences, may I suggest, because you've been a survivor. You think of the word survivor and victim. You've never seen yourself as a victim. You've just got up and got on with it.
Oh, I keep going, yeah. And even when I heard that people were talking about me, my decision right there and then was, okay, hold on a minute. I am going into my room. I'm going to go live on my Instagram, and I put up a 15-minute video explaining my life from start to finish, from the minute I held that 2-year-old in my hands and promised that I was going to look after him. I told Instagram, the whole of Instagram, exactly what has happened with my mom, exactly what has happened with Jamie, all of my life right up to now, because there was no way, Smeeta, that I was going to allow anybody else to be talking about me or to, give their unconscious bias about me, because they were making it very public. And I thought, no, I have to take control here. If my story is going to be out, I am going to tell it.
And
And
then you want to be in control
that's
of your
what
own
I did.
story, and rather than Chinese whispers and somebody making up stories about you. But I want to just come back to you because I clearly, in some ways, your podcast has also been your savior in some ways to help you get up in the morning and give you a focus.
Yeah,
When I introduced you, you are not just a mother of one child, you're a mother and a grandmother.
I am a
Um,
mother of 4 and a grandmother of
Mother of two, exactly. And so you
granddaughters.
have moved on with your life. Um,
Yes,
you
absolutely.
have done so many things in your life despite these unbelievable challenges that you
Yeah,
have had to face pretty much from birth. You may
yeah,
not have been acknowledged it at birth, but certainly from the age of 8, 9, 10, you were
yeah,
very, very aware of the life that you were living and how to manage it and how to protect yourself. You
yeah,
sound to me like you're fiercely protective of those you love, and you're fiercely caring and loving. And these are just natural, instinctive qualities that you have nurtured within yourself. But
yeah,
on a day to day basis, Laura, I mean, yes, you've got the podcast, and yes, every once in a while, people might upset you on Instagram or whatever, social media is like that.
yeah.
But how do you manage every day? Because these are stories. You've shared the story with me, you've shared it also in your own Instagram post. But you
It,
have challenges on a day-to-day level. There are constant, unconscious biases that might, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, creep into your head saying, how can I manage this? I'm no good. This happened to me. Look how lovely other people are. People do that kind of thing when they're particularly
it,
feeling down. How do you manage not to do
yeah,
that?
that is exactly what happened. I went through a phase of hating myself and saying to myself, well, if you didn't cry to sleep in her room that night, that wouldn't have happened. You
So
know,
it's all your fault, is
yeah,
what you're
if
saying.
I had gotten Jamie to the doctor sooner with the swollen glands, he mightn't have died. I also had a stillborn baby in 2004. I live with that as well because although I know it wasn't my fault as a mother, I feel maybe it was. I will never get it out of my head that I know I don't blame myself 100%, but there's always that in the back of my mind that tells me, you know, maybe I could have done something different, or maybe, I don't know. I really don't. But I will say, Smita, it's not been easy. I also told Instagram as well, I went through a heavy cocaine habit, and we'll say that started 12 years ago and only ended 5 years ago. Now, started off at weekends, I would go out with my friends, say, and, it was a weekend thing. It was go out for a drink, and cocaine was in the pubs. You go into the bathroom and one of the girls would say, oh, do you want some of this? And of course, me being on a, not a suicide mission, but on a hating myself a time of my life. And it was before I met my now partner, Chris, who was amazing. We've been together now for 10 years. But that started off as self sabotage at the start when I started the cocaine. That very quickly evolved and turned into twice a week, 3 times a week, to the point that I would wake up on a Wednesday and say, I have a lot of cleaning to do. I think I'll go out and get a bag of cocaine. And I could have died. Thinking about it now, I could have died.
It was kind of escaping, wasn't it, Laura? Because you think about what all that you have been through. You've just itemized it to me and to all of us listeners. How do you wake up in the morning? You've got to find somewhere to escape to, and you found this as an escape.
That was my escape. Yeah, that was my escape. And I felt really confident when I had it, and I could talk to anybody and all the rest of it. And it took a good few years, I have to say. Now, what we did was when I said, right, enough is enough, I had to, because I literally had gotten to the stage that I would get into bed at night and I'd be lying in bed and I could feel that my heart was hurting. Like if I put my hand on my chest, I could feel it beating really hard. And I knew, I said, you are just not going to wake up one morning. I just wouldn't. So that was a bit of a fright that I got. And I also had to look at my kids and say, you know what? Like Nikita was about to have a baby, and I was like, I don't want my daughter knowing that her child's granny is on drugs. I really didn't want that. And that was the making of me. Becoming a grandmother was the making of all of that, because it gave me something else to focus on. You know what I mean? Where I used Jamie through my teenage years. When Nikita told me that she was pregnant, I was like, right, socks up, big girl pants on, and you need to do this now, which I did. So the only way that I could do it, because we were in the wrong company, the wrong people who I thought were friends, but weren't. So what we did was we moved. We moved house. We moved completely from the area that we were living in. We moved to a different part of Dublin, and we've never looked back. And I mean, Chris was very good. Chris put up with a lot from me. And when we moved out here, I said to Chris, from the day I walk out of that house in Swords, I will never, ever touch a drink or drug or anything like that. No, I never had a drink problem, but the drink, it all went hand in hand. And I didn't want to be like that anymore. I said, I want to be the best mom I can be. I want to be the best grandmother. And I want my kids to be proud. And above all that, I wanted to be proud of myself. Do you know what I mean? So that was what got me through. Literally, I had to move house. I just blocked out everybody from my life, thinking sober. I was like, they actually were using my house. they weren't worried about my life or my concerns or anything that would, make anything better for me or my family. They were just happy to have somebody to do it with or to sit drinking with or whatever.
Laura, I don't know where. I mean, if I were anywhere near you, I would be giving you a big hug because you put on those big girl pants and you got on with it. And that is what we all have to do
Yeah,
anywhere in the world.
I
When
mean,
we listen to your stories, I mean,
everybody,
most of us wouldn't even have half the challenges you've experienced. And yet we don't think to put on our big girl pants. We sit quietly in the corner crying and feeling sorry for ourselves. We have
absolutely.
to take a leaf out of your book and say, if
Yeah,
Laura can do it, we can do it too. I mean, you've been incredible, Laura.
that is so true. If I can do it, anyone can, because I have suffered really badly with my mental health over the years. So I say I have 4 kids. I have Nikita is 21. Ayla, God rest her, she would have been 18 last Wednesday. Jamie is now 7. He is named after Uncle Jamie, of
Of
course.
course.
I always talk about Jamie. They know who he is. And little Christopher is 4. So, I have a lot to live for. I have a lot to be hopeful for.
And
I
you have
will.
your wonderful partner of 10 years too.
Chris is amazing. He's absolutely amazing. He is my number one fan. I mean, he can come in from work after a hard day's work. He's a plasterer and he works really hard. He works for the council and he'll come in from work and he'll just know by me what kind of a day I'm having. And, he'll give me the nudge and he'll say, here's a cup of tea, go on in and have a rest. Because he knows, I don't even have to say anything. He can read me. We genuinely, Smita, we are best friends.
Soulmates and best friends. On
Oh,
that wonderful, happy note,
yeah.
Laura Kavanagh, I think I want the listeners to just stop and appreciate and understand this wonderful, wonderful human being, Laura Kavanagh, who we have learned so much from. Laura, thank you so very much for sharing your stories of unconscious bias with me today.
Thank you for having me, Smita. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Proud to announce that my podcast series is now heard in 104 countries, ranging from Guadeloupe to Iceland, Argentina to Palestine, and even Morocco. It is ranked in the top 3% worldwide. This is clearly a series that connects with people all over the world, and you are one of them. I thank you for listening. I would also like to thank Jack Godfrey for his original music in the closing of each podcast interview. If you like this episode, please do share, rate and review. I am Smita Tharoor. Until next time.